Hello and welcome to the Behind the Blockchain podcast. Today I'm joined by Markus Franke, CEO and co-founder of Mento Labs. Markus, welcome to the show. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much for having me here. Very happy to be here and talking to you. Super exciting.
No problem. Thank you for joining me. So Markus, for people who don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely happy to. So as I said, my name is Markus. I'm CEO and co-founder of Mento Labs, a company that is focused on giving people everywhere in the world access to local currency stablecoins. In the end, producing infrastructure for stablecoins for every country in the world. We can dive a bit deeper into that in a moment. I'm based in Berlin. We just moved into a very new and exciting office inside Full Node in Berlin. I'm in the blockchain and Web3 space for 7 years now, and I'm coming from a traditional finance and traditional economics background into the space.
Sounds cool. Sounds cool. So could you give us a bit of an intro or a talk through your career journey so far?
Absolutely happy to. So I mentioned I'm coming from a traditional finance and economics background. So I studied economics a long time ago. And then from that, I went to work in investment banking in the economic field. So I worked for different investment banks like JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch at the time in the roles of mergers and acquisitions and related areas. And then I thought I want to actually dive deeper into how markets work, and therefore decided to pursue or to go back to university and pursue an academic career. I started to work on a PhD and started to do research in financial markets. And during that time, I was both working on research on financial markets, but also worked in teaching, like basic economics and finance classes. From there, I went back to traditional finance industry and worked as a portfolio manager and was mostly focusing on large portfolios, managing large portfolios from pension funds, family offices, and focused a lot on managing the risk side of the portfolio. So I managed a 2 billion euro pension fund, um, and basically focused on the broader risk allocation. And then a very good friend of mine, we studied together, told me that they are starting a project called Celo, a layer one EVM blockchain that is focused on giving people everywhere in the world better access to financial primitives, especially in countries where they don't have good access to financial primitives, meaning good access to stable currencies, to saving, to lending, to borrowing, all of these things. I got super interested in Celo. So I joined them, and I think in a traditional company, my initial role in starting up Celo was something like a chief economist. So thinking about all economic questions you have when building out a blockchain ecosystem, which goes from incentive design. Celo is a proof of stake blockchain, so the proof of stake incentives, but also building out a blockchain platform, stablecoin platform on that blockchain. And from that, at some point, when the Celo ecosystem grew and the mainnet was live, we thought it totally makes sense to have a focused company that has a team specializing in stablecoins focused on the stablecoin platform. Similar, for example, to how Ethereum Foundation and MakerDAO are separate teams. We then separated the core team working on Celo L1, soon to be L2 development, and the team focused on stablecoins. So we did a spin-off. Mento Labs is a spin-off from C Labs. C Labs is focusing on core infrastructure work for the Celo ecosystem, and Mento Labs is focusing on building out stablecoins for every country in the world.
Sounds cool. Sounds like a great mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something that also sets the whole Celo ecosystem apart from many other ecosystems out there. It's very mission driven. Celo now has an initiative that it moves back onto the mothership, onto Ethereum, to become an Ethereum L2.
Okay.
And Celo from the start had this like mission of giving people around the world access to financial system, to build out real world applications that enable people in every country of the world to take part in the digital economy. And therefore, I think what Celo is trying to do is, in the end, scaling Ethereum to real world use cases. And if you look at usage, Celo already is like over the past like many months always in like the top 10 to top 5 of the most used blockchains out there. And I think with the move to being an Ethereum L2, this will help scale and increase this even more. We have projects that are building out of many different African countries, Latin American countries, really cool and useful real world applications for day-to-day users. And this is something that excites me a lot. And what we at Mento Labs want to do is support these users with local currency stablecoins. I think we see the success story of dollar-based stablecoins, and I think dollar-based stablecoins are really cool, especially in countries where you don't have access to stable currency because of high inflation, because of currencies that lose value against the dollar. And with a dollar stablecoin, you actually allow people to save money, for example, in dollar and in making the dollar accessible. But at the same time, in these countries, people maybe want to borrow. Maybe they are entrepreneurs and want to get a small loan to build out a business. And especially for that, you would need local currency, because as a small business owner, your revenues are in local currency. And therefore, your loan should also be in local currency so that you are able to pay back that loan. Therefore, for me, building out local currency stablecoins is really about financial inclusion, something that the whole blockchain scene, not only Celo, had always on their missions and on their flags what they wanted to do. And I think with this, it's for me really exciting because we're actually really executing on that plan, on that mission, and see like adoption in many countries around the world for these things. So it's super exciting.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It sounds like a really good mission, to be honest, to be able to, yeah, improve that financial inclusion around the world and get people, get people involved, which is brilliant. It was actually a very mission driven project that first ever got me into crypto or Web3 back in, I think, the start of 2020. A project called Telcoin. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. They're like
Yes,
a
yes, of course.
remittance project and stuff. Who were looking at kind of bringing banking to the unbanked across developing countries and things like this. So yeah, love any project that has a real solid mission, is solving real problems. I think is really cool. It's no, it's cool. Well, take it back to something you said when you were explaining your career journey when you became chief economist at Celo. You mentioned you were there asking or looking at all the different types of questions that you could ask or you could answer. Did you notice there was much difference between the things you were researching in more traditional finance compared to the things and the questions you needed to ask in Web3 using blockchain and that stablecoin environment? Was there much difference?
It's a very good question, and I think this is in the end goes actually or talks to why I'm so excited to now work in this space. If you're in traditional economics, you do research on how financial markets work, even how money works in some ways, and in every like day-to-day transaction. We use money to exchange, to purchase, to save, to lend, to borrow, to do all of this. And if you look at money as a technology, this technology didn't really change over the past hundreds of years. In the end, of course, the basically means of payment changed. Today, I can maybe use my phone, or I can use a credit card by just tapping it on a device and pay for something. But money itself as a technology didn't really change. And as a researcher, you were mostly looking at money as like sort of a given, and you do research on how then the markets work, how transactions work. But you actually are not spending a lot of time to innovate on money and how it could be used. And this is This is super exciting that this industry is actually now trying to do this. And now we are still, I think, even if it feels I've been in this industry for 100 years now, because it's like a very fast moving industry, we are just at the beginning of really innovating on money. And I think this is the exciting thing. And I think this is the big difference between work in, for example, academic research when it comes to economics, and working in Web3. In Web3, you really try to innovate on, for example, money as a technology. A few examples on innovation is in the field of stablecoins that you could introduce new currencies for specific use cases. You could introduce currencies that can be used as a universal basic income for people in regions that would really depend on that. You could think about new forms of collateralizing money to use, for example, nature or tokenized nature as collateral for money. You could, instead of borrowing money into existence, think about new ways how money could get or come into existence. You could think about economic features like, for example, demurrage that that basically attributes value to money only if it's used for transactions. Things like this. You could have like specific new currencies that follow a basket of goods or a basket of different currencies in one token that you use for settlement problems. So there's so many things to innovate on. And in the end, having then all of these things based on an EVM backend, on a blockchain, making this really, really scalable, make this also very easy to integrate. If you have a new form of money, it could be used in any of the existing wallets. I think this is really exciting, and it opens up a lot of opportunity. And I think here we're just at the start, at the beginning.
It's a deep rabbit hole when you start kind of getting
Absolutely.
into it and exploring it. This question might be putting you on the spot a little bit. How do you work out what's needed and what's not? Like what how do you look at what areas you need to innovate on, and kind of go down that rabbit hole and start researching on this, and why choose one over another, or do you try and do it all at once? Where do
Yeah,
you
and I
kind of
think
sit on that?
I think this it's a very good question, because it goes to the core of decentralization and building open source ecosystems. In the end, if, for example, we as a project building infrastructure out of Berlin, we might know a bit what could be needed in Berlin, but maybe we don't have a lot of knowledge on what is needed in Kenya or in Brazil or in the Philippines, because simply we're like then more folks here in Berlin and don't have that local knowledge. And I think the beauty of open source and decentralized community is that you not only get input on what you're building from people all over the world, you can actually engage, work together in a very easy way. Since it is open source, and since it is a platform, people also then in Kenya or in the Philippines or Brazil, sticking to these three examples, can integrate your infrastructure, can build projects on top of this infrastructure that are needed locally. An example for this, maybe trying to be a bit more concrete or hands-on. In Kenya, it was really interesting to me to learn how like the lending or loan market, credit market is working. Many people there don't have like first-hand access to a bank, but still maybe need a small loan to get a business started. And then often in these markets, it's they rely on community. They maybe have a messenger group they where they meet and communicate about some of them having excess cash and some of them having need of cash. And then you can basically in your community basically have a lending circle where people then basically give small loans to each other in a trusted environment. And I think it's amazing that this works. And of course, we can only support with some infrastructure that we are building, but building then out the real product then probably needs to happen on the ground by a project on the ground that should also benefit from putting in risk and entrepreneurial spirit to build this out. And therefore, I think this is the exciting thing about open source, about decentralized setups, that you don't need to basically build something from the Silicon Valley or from Berlin and try to conquer the world. It's more like let's engage and find people all over the world that maybe have a similar mission and that also want to contribute to that. And I think this is very exciting.
Yeah, definitely. It really helps you enable people in those countries and give them access to the infrastructure to be able to build the projects that they need to build, which is no, it's cool. That's cool. So obviously you're at the moment CEO at Mento Labs. I guess a lot of people would look at your role now and think, you know what, I'd love to be the CEO. I'd love to be the co-founder of a project. Are there certain key skills that you've learned along the way that have really helped you to achieve the position that you're in now?
I think it's a very good question. And thinking about like what the key skills could be back at the time at school, at university, doing the PhD, during the time of academic research, I was always like focused a lot on like the hard skills that you need to learn to make an academic career, that you need to learn about certain statistical features or statistics features, about certain stochastic processes, like really hard skills in math or hard skills in economics that you need to learn that actually make a difference. When it comes to being a CEO or founder of a project, I would say the soft skill side becomes more and more important. And I always at university thought like, come on, these soft skills. It's something you can build out once you needed them. It's more important to learn like a very specific model because this is then actually something that you have. But now this changes a bit. If you think about your typical work or the problems you're facing when starting a company, a lot of them have to do a lot with handling uncertainty. You don't have a lot of structure in that work because in the end, when you start a project, you have to implement that structure. There's a lot of ambiguity, and this is coming from many different sides, this like uncertainty. There's pressure by the market. There are questions from potential clients and future clients. There are partners that maybe hopefully want to partner with you. There are tax authorities that want that you pay your taxes. There are investors that want to see a return on their investment. There's employees that want to have like a good job and want to work on something that also excites them. So there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of ambiguity, and I think the core role of a founder or a CEO is actually adding a bit of like managing the ambiguity, adding a bit more certainty, adding that vision. in the end, you as a founder or CEO, you want to hire then people who are the best in their respective areas. You want to have like the best engineers, the best CTO. You want to have the best product people. You want to have the best business developers. You can't be all of that. But what you have to provide is, in some way, some guidance in that, and removing a lot of ambiguity there. So I think it's a core skill for founders, that they are able to work in a very uncertain environment, that they are able to work under a lot of pressure, and that are able to, I would say, provide a vision, so that you find people that can help you build what you want to build. And I think there is something that is really, really important in Web3, that a lot of projects missed in the past, and that contributed actually to the high volatility in the field. And this is actually something that there's a lot of shiny projects out there, but they not always actually build something that provides economic benefit to users. And they are maybe building something that sounds really, really cool and really, really complicated. But if you break it down, it doesn't create a lot of economic value. So basically, the same in this industry, like in any other industry, is you have to have a focus on your user to build something that they actually want to use and can use, and that provides some economic value to them. And I think sometimes this very simple truth people forget, because they build something that is really fancy and complicated. But if you look deeper into it, it doesn't provide any economic value. And I think having that focus is important.
And again, this might put you on the spot a little bit. If someone hasn't handled ambiguity before, hasn't been in the situations where they've had to support a number of different roles and things like this, how do you learn that? Is that just on the job experience, and you just deal with situations as they're thrown at you? Is there certain situations you can put yourself in to try and improve those skills? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think there are a lot, or many elements to this job that you need to learn on the way. Because if it's your first company you're starting, there are many you might be an amazing engineer and might build beautiful code, but you never actually incorporated a entity, or you never actually put a payroll process in place. And if a lot of these things are like maybe not the coolest tasks, when you're excited about building code, you might be really bored by engaging with local regulators and authorities to incorporate your entity. And therefore, I think as a founder, you really need to take care of these things, because this is often something that you need. And therefore, you should be relatively flexible in handling these tasks, and then finding also people that can help to build and so on. So, yeah, when we started the first company, I also never have incorporated an entity, and therefore I had to learn on the job. And I think here founders need to be really, really flexible. I think the core skill then is basically, again, being able to work in uncertainty, and being flexible, and trying to solve these problems. Because if you're the best entity incorporator, yeah, as an entrepreneur, you don't do this very often. You only do this 3 times. So like that skill doesn't help you a lot, because it's not really scalable thing to just incorporate entities. So I think there's like many things that are thrown at you, and you need to in some way be flexible and come up with solutions to them. I think it sounds a bit oversimplified in many cases, but keeping that flexibility is really, really important, and also very different to the work in a traditional large company, if you work in like a large organization, there are many things that are more important. There's like maybe you work on a very small like part of the overall organization, and you have to focus on that. Maybe you are in such a big organization that also the politics in how to engage with different stakeholders are really, really important. Yeah, this is very, very different. Most of the times you have much more structure when you work in a large organization than when starting up a new company. So if you like that structure, I think it might be better to then also join a company where you like the values, where you can actually see that you can contribute. Not everyone has to be a founder or CEO. And I think also good CEOs realize that they have to be in some way a servant to their team, and enable the team to execute what they are working on. I think if you've never started a company, maybe it looks from the outside a bit different, but actually your main job is to serve the people that work at your organization.
Did you always know that you wanted to be the CEO or founder of a project or business?
No, and I think in the beginning I was like more focused on, yeah, especially in the beginning when I worked in research on economics, on how financial markets work, and I didn't care too much about like the organization itself, if it's like a research institution, a university, or a traditional company that I work in. I wanted to work on economic questions, for example. I think with this knowledge in this space, I had an area where I could contribute. Of course, there's, especially in Web3, there are a lot of brilliant people. And therefore, finding your area where you can contribute something was really, really important. That this then at some point also led to a spin-off and led to starting a new company and leading that company in some way as a CEO was more of a byproduct of like I wanted to work on really fun economic problems. So, and I think I didn't always know, especially since also the work as a founder, as a CEO, is not like a very typical work. Every day can be very, very different. There are days where you basically need to be part of brainstorms where you go really, really deep into problems. And there are days where you just have one meeting, one after the other, and you just need to, in some ways, survive all of these meetings that you can actually then get back to the computer and answer open emails and messages you received. So it's not basically the typical CEO work, I would say.
And you briefly touched on it a second ago, but do you think that anyone can be a founder?
I think to be successful, I think it's clear that, or it's important that people think about how they can add value. And if they can add value by bringing a team together, by creating a vision that more people want to follow, I think then, of course, they can also be good founders. If people realize that they can create amazing value by building beautiful code, maybe they should rather be not a CEO, but maybe a CTO, or by leading an engineering team or be part of an engineering team where they contribute with beautiful code. So I don't think that, also in traditional companies, I don't think that everyone should and need to be a manager. And I think often with traditional organizations, this is actually a trap they fall into, that they basically promote talent away from the job. So it could be also in finance, for example, that you are the best portfolio manager and you create like the best outcome for the investors, and you're amazing at that job. But in order to have like a good career in the company you work for, you will be promoted to at some point then lead a team, and then instead of managing a portfolio, you all of a sudden have to manage like people, which is a different very different job, but you have to do this to basically have a good career and earn more, which is not really clever. I think those who are really good in managing people should manage people, and that are really good in managing portfolios should manage portfolios, and those are really good in building code and writing code should write code. And you shouldn't promote them away from that. And therefore, I think people should try to like find out what are the core skills, and that doesn't necessarily mean hard skills like they are best in writing Solidity. If their core skills is bringing people together or engage partners, maybe business development is perfect. If they are basically in some way want to manage teams and bring talent together and serve these teams, maybe then like either an organizational role or CEO role might be perfect.
Yeah, you're right, completely right. I speak to so many engineers that they may be senior engineers and they think the next step is going to be a team lead or an engineering manager role. They go into that role, work there for 6 months, realize they hate it, hate the management side of things, really miss coding, and then end up going back to being an individual contributor somewhere else. And also, you see it in recruitment all the time. Businesses I've worked in previously, in order to be promoted from consultant to senior consultant to principal to manager, it's all based on the amount of placements that you make over a certain time period, then gets you promoted. And then you think, well, actually, the best people, the best billers, we call it, it's the best people making placements, aren't usually the best managers, because they have a different mindset of kind of what they're looking at or what they want to focus on and this kind of stuff. So you almost promote away your best talent and watch their placements kind of drop off a little bit, or quite a lot of the time, because they're trying to juggle things that they're not necessarily naturally skilled at. So yeah, you see it all the time across all sorts of industries, right? Yeah, it's blows my mind when companies do that. So you briefly touched on it,
Yeah,
but
absolutely. And I think also, oh, sorry.
sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think there's also, when you think about or look at the types of organizations in this field, also here, especially Web3 is really interesting, because in this field, there's a lot of innovation, and therefore also people try to innovate how organizations work together. There's things like, okay, very flat hierarchies. There are things like trying to derive group decisions in a clever way. So also it's an experimental field for different organizational structures. And we tried out also in the journey of the organizations that worked on Celo. We tried out different methods of organizing teams. We tried out holacracy. We tried out a middle version between holacracy and something that is a bit more hierarchical. And also that for me was really, really interesting, because it justifies in some way all these organizational classes that you had when you were studying economics had to do. And then like in the past, they were probably a bit annoying. And now I find it really interesting to see also in that like organizational structure, how you derive this or come to decisions in an organization. Also in this field, people try out different things, which is really, really interesting. Yeah, sorry for interrupting you.
No, it's all good. So talking of trying different things and things you find interesting, why did you initially take an interest in Web3 and blockchain?
It's a very good question. And like, I think when I came to blockchain and Web3, I didn't know too much about all of this industry. As I mentioned, I was coming from an economics background. I looked into monetary theory. I looked into how markets function. I worked in traditional finance in the markets. And therefore, I always had that interest on how a market functions. And actually, when I learned more about Web3, that this is in some way at the core, how people do transactions with each other, how people are incentivized to do transactions or to interact. also how money works as a technology, or how markets function. All of this is at the core of this Web3 ecosystem. Also, how ownership is transferred, new forms of ownerships in new types of tokens, in NFTs, for example. All of these are core economic questions. And then Web3 is bringing basically brilliant developers together with entrepreneurs that look into this, into incentives, into transactions, into money as a technology. And this for me is super, super interesting. And then good friend of mine, we studied together, started this project Celo, and Celo was about bringing this technology, and still is, to end users all over the world, especially to these countries where it's much harder to or be part of the economy, because you don't have access to stable currency, or because you don't have access to the financial system, or you don't have access to a bank. Especially there, I think this technology provides or adds a lot of value. If I today, for example, in Berlin, want to buy a coffee, I can use my phone to pay, I can use my credit card to pay. It's super easy, but that might be different in Kenya, or in Nigeria, or in the Philippines, maybe because there's no available stable currency, or because there's no bank that I can use, or and so on. And for me, I mentioned now also different African countries a lot. This is really interesting to see, because in Africa, mobile money there is already a reality. Adoption of digital currencies and blockchain-based solutions is growing faster than anywhere else in the world. So what you can see there is that actually people leapfrog in some way all the steps that we went through in economies like Germany or the US, where we went from paper-based money to checks to other forms of payments, to the credit cards today and so on. And here people, for example, across Africa, basically directly jump to mobile money, blockchain-based solutions, and all of this. And it's super interesting to see. So for me, this was like a big part of the reason to enter this field. And I think a second part I mentioned earlier is this opportunity to be innovative, not take, for example, money as a given technology, but actually innovate on that technology. I think is a huge, huge opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. And see, people look at you being the founder of a Web3 project, and it has this, to people on the outside, almost has this like glamorous connotation around it of, founder in Web3 and this kind of stuff. But what's it really like working on the ground, trying to get a new project started and up and off the ground and get people aware of it and hiring the right people? Like, what's that really like?
It's a good question, and I think, I mean, we've touched this before a bit, that the role of a founder or the role of a CEO of a company is often like being a manager of ambiguity, and add structure and remove uncertainty, things like this. I think this is true probably for every founder and every CEO, but it feels, at least for me, that in Web3 this is much more amplified, because it is a very young industry, and similar to many other young technologies, this industry is going through a lot of like hype cycles, bubbles, extreme phases of speculation. I mean, Web3 and blockchain is like the absolute incarnation of hype and hype cycles. It's a lot of the projects are about that, and I think in that extreme environment, still trying to basically add value, find real users, build a real product is even more difficult, and requires, I would say, even more endurance than in many other industries, where it's maybe easier to basically stick to a certain path. I think this industry, similar again to many other young industries, also attract then sometimes a lot of crazy projects where these like boom and bust phases or these bull and bear markets then sometimes also are necessary, especially the bear markets, to in some way clean and help the market and help the industry to become healthy again, so that some of the pure hype projects then maybe have to leave and have to restart by thinking about what the actual product is. And I think this is where it's a bit different in Web3. It's like it's driven by so much hype, driven by so much cycles and volatility, that here you have to really even more focus on what is the real product and how we can we add real economic value.
So, do you have any advice for anyone who is stepping into Web3 for the first time, looking to build a successful career for themselves? Obviously, you've mentioned a few things there that people probably need to be aware of about Web3 before they come in. But is there any advice that you could share to help people be successful?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to chat a bit about that. I think if you're like for the first time stepping into Web3 and go, for example, to one of these large conferences and gatherings, you see a lot of funny projects, a lot of like super interesting projects, and actually you will be bombarded with like opportunities where people say this is the next big thing. And I think crucial here is to find basically your way in that crazy industry. A lot comes back to something that I've mentioned like earlier, I think at least 2 times, that like focus on what user want, how can like economic value be created, and then maybe also question some of these projects. Do they really create value? Am I therefore at the right spot? I think this is probably important, and this industry makes it really, really hard. I mean, we're recording this during Berlin Blockchain Week. Berlin Blockchain Week is like one example of these crazy conferences. If you go to one of the conferences like DAppCon or many others here, you see a lot of like interesting projects, and you need to in some way find your way to navigate this space, because everyone is building on something new. Therefore, it's a lot of new things, maybe also many more new things than in some traditional industries. So I think it's maybe not advice, it's more like a observation that in this space it's even harder to stay focused on what you want to do, where you want to add value. But at the same time, it's also super important. So in my case, I can speak to, I wanted to work on economic questions, and sometimes it's easy to get basically derailed and think about many other things. And therefore, I try to focus often on this. And if you're, for example, a young developer or a new developer that wants to enter the space, I think here also it is really easy to be sucked into a rabbit hole that basically lets you build a lot of things that nobody will ever use, because you can get, I would say, derailed to a lot of like things that don't really add value to this. So I think if you enter that space, always try to find projects you contribute to that actually in some way generate economic value. For me, and I think for the whole Celo ecosystem and the Mento ecosystem, this like providing value is a lot about, in the end, building real world applications, building real world use cases, building something that people really can use, not only for speculation, but actually for real transactions where they want to, for example, do a payment, send remittances, send money across border, save, lend, borrow. All of these things, I think, are extremely important. Maybe to add to this, something we haven't touched today here is what I also find really interesting is this whole regenerative finance aspect of blockchain and Web3. When this whole space started with Bitcoin, I think at some point, many people were looking into the energy efficiency of Bitcoin and how much energy it uses and so on. And therefore, it actually, the industry got maybe a bit of a negative stamp in terms of the impact on the environment. But since Web3 is like a big mechanism to distribute incentives and distribute value and distribute ownership, this is a great mechanism to also set the right incentives to save the environment and to do something good for nature and so on. And therefore, this whole like emergence of regenerative finance projects that tokenize value of, like, for example, carbon emissions or trees or clean air, clean water, and so on, and use this in incentive mechanisms, I think for me is a super interesting upcoming space. And yeah, if people enter that space, they should look out for, is there real usage? Is there maybe projects that actually do something good for maybe for the environment, or having like can actually provide real value to end users to navigate in that space?
Yeah, I was told a really interesting piece of advice from someone who was on the podcast quite a few months ago now, actually. Someone called Anthony Rose, who's the VP of Technology from Matter Labs. They make the ZK Sync. He was saying that because there's so many things being built in Web3, there's so many problems being solved. There's just a lot of noise, new things popping up all the time. He said uh, when he was looking to get into Web3 for the first time, he was doing his research about the actual industry itself and the different problems that are being solved in this kind of thing. And actually went, you know what, I'm really passionate about looking into zero knowledge tech. You know, that's one area that I find the most interesting, the one area I think will have a huge impact on the space moving forward. And then he looked at, right, well, who are the main projects who are solving problems in ZK? And then came across Matter Labs, obviously building ZK Sync, and then spoke to them. And even though he didn't have any necessary experience within Web3 prior to that, because he was so passionate about the problem and said, look, I love this, I really want to get involved. He ended up obviously getting the VP role there. That can obviously happen at all levels. You know, I guess as a CEO and as a founder, if you had someone who is super passionate about solving the problem that you guys are working on, but they didn't necessarily have too much of the in-depth knowledge industry yet, you know, so I guess someone who can come to you and say, look, I love what you're doing. This is the only thing I ever want to work on. You know, it's an amazing problem, amazing mission. You know, you'd probably be a lot more likely to even speak to that person or potentially take them on. So I think being able to do your own research about the industry, look at the problems that you're really passionate about and really interested in, and then seeing what projects are solving those problems is probably a really good place to start.
Absolutely. And I think this industry is, especially when you start to look into it, just takes some time to do that research, because there's so many shiny websites, so many shiny white papers, so many shiny booths of projects here at the fairs, at Berlin Blockchain Week, at all of these other events that are happening around the world. I think it just takes some time, and you should take that time if you want to enter that space to try to understand what is behind, what is actually driving value in some way. And I think this the same is true actually also for people who invest in that space. So many people invested in projects like Terra Luna and others because it looked super shiny, it looked super successful. But if you actually took a bit to really try to understand the economics behind, it would have been clear very quickly that this is not something sustainable that is being built there. And then markets can move really, really fast to then actually, correct this mistake of building a not sustainable protocol. And I think if you want to enter that space and take that time to learn a bit how that space functions and actually what are the economics behind, and is this project that you're looking at actually building something that can be sustainable, then yeah, this is always, I think, time well spent if you want to enter that space.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any advice on where someone can go to start that research? Is it just get onto Google and just start with the basics of what everything is, or is there certain websites that you would go to have a look or anything like that?
Yeah, and I think, of course, Google and also the websites of the larger projects, they're always a good starting point to find easy information. I think it also makes sense to like pick a few ecosystems and look a bit deeper into. Of course, you can start with like the big ecosystems. You could look around a bit what is out there on Ethereum. It's like the biggest builder ecosystem out there, and therefore you find tons of resources on that. And then from Ethereum, you could then look a bit deeper also to the L2s, for example, to Celo then, and the information that is out there on Celo. If you're interested in like the real world applications, in the sustainability aspect of it, then you can basically dive deeper into. And then if like Ethereum is the first layer and then Celo the layer 2, the third layer then is something like Mento that builds on the Celo blockchain stablecoins. So we are basically even one more layer in, and then there are hopefully a lot of projects that actually build on Mento and build FX platforms or local payment applications using the Mento stablecoins. So then we are already at a fourth layer of projects. So basically you can go as deep as you want. There's a lot of information out. And then I think also podcasts like yours actually and many others are super interesting, because in that space you have a lot of like tech people. Tech people like to do podcasts and so on. So you also find good information there as well.
No, that's brilliant advice. Yeah, brilliant advice for anyone who's looking to get into the space and yeah, helping them to understand where they can start. Um, Marcus, to finish up, then you shared some amazing advice today. Shared a lot of insight into your career and the skills that people can learn. Knowing what you know now about business, technology, leadership, if you could go back to the start of your career, any advice that you could share for your younger self?
I think for my younger self, it would be a bit specific advice. I think I came in this industry from an economics background, and I think if I now could give advice to my younger self, I think I should have looked into the technology aspect, into coding, into that aspect of the space earlier. I think I'm like a bit older in than the average in this industry, and therefore I think especially I should have like looked into this earlier. This is something where I'm still learning every day. But I think this is a bit specific for me. I think everyone in that space um, should look into these two aspects, basically the economic side of things and the technical aspect of it, at least a bit. Everyone has different specialties and specializations in this spectrum, but understanding at least the basics of both sides is really important, because this field brings both together, basically incentive design, economics, stablecoin, money as a technology, markets. All of this is like a big part of the whole Web3 space. And then, of course, the other big part is the whole, like, how is this built, the coding behind the open source infrastructure and so on. And I think having a basic understanding of both is very important, but then finding your specialization in that spectrum is also important.
That's brilliant. Brilliant. Well, Marcus, thank you very much for taking the time to have a conversation today. I've really enjoyed it. You shared some brilliant insights. I'm going to have to rewatch this quite a few times to go back and take notes uh, to make sure I take a lot of this in myself. If people listening or watching are really interested to learn more about Mental Labs or about Celo, I'm guessing you guys are across like Twitter, Discord. Obviously, you have your own website as well. Would you direct people towards the website, or is it better in one of the Discord communities or Twitter communities with you guys to learn more information?
Yeah, I think all of these are good channels. As everyone in the space, Twitter is important medium for us. For example, if you want to follow the Mento community, you can follow Mento Labs on Twitter. Of course, you should also look into Celo on Twitter, which is, I think, an amazing community of mission-driven projects. Both Mento.org and Celo.org are entry points in terms of websites. And then, as every other project in the space, also there is a lot of discussion in the different Discord channels. So, for example, for Mento, this chat.mento.org, or for Celo, chat.celo.org are entry points into the Discord communities. So I think if you just want to keep up to date what is happening, then Twitter is good. If you want to get a broad overview, then the webpage is good. And if you want to like contribute to the discussion and chat with folks, then Discord is good. And yeah, always happy to chat with people who are interested about the space. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here, to talk to you. I really had a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on as a guest, and I'm sure I'll speak to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.